So thank you everybody for attending this Pangeanic webinar where I'm meeting Arle Lommel from CSA Research in Boston. I think everybody knows Arle, but for the benefit of those that don't or haven't had the pleasure to meet Arle personally or listen to Arle previously, Arle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Arle Lommel, and as background, I've been working in the localization space since the late 90s. I started out working for an organization called LISA, which some people may remember. Um, did that until LISA closed its doors, and then I worked at the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence on machine translation related projects. And till 2016 when I joined CSA Research, where I'm focusing on AI, MT, economic value of languages, and various and sundry other items. So in a nutshell, that's it. Some people may know me because of the development of MQM for assessing translation quality. So
Good, good. So Arle has been in the industry as a researcher, and I would say early developer as well, because MQM is a landmark development in quality estimation and helping companies and people understand about the metrics, how we measure things, and only by measuring we can make things better. So today we are here to discuss three subjects that initially on the surface might not seem very related: agents, deeply adapted machine translation, and knowledge retrieval. But if you understand the science behind everything that has been happening over the last 2 years, they are deeply related and they are converging. Funny enough, there's very little KPIs, there's very little metrics still. So there's a lot of work to do here in order to understand how successful agents or fluent, very fluent machine translation is becoming, or is it as good as humans? How can we measure that? And of course, knowledge retrieval, how can we substantiate or confidently rely on information that large language models give us, or smaller language, small operations, AI chatbots provide. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to be running the presentation. Arle, I think everybody can see the presentation here.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So let's kick off by talking about agents. Now, what is an agent? Do you want to describe agents or do you want to recap what is an LLM and then go to?
Well, maybe it is useful to talk a bit about what an LLM is, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it itself is, and then that spills over into, I think, misconceptions about what it can and can't do and what it might mean to be an agent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, an LLM at its heart, and this is dramatically oversimplifying things, is a collection of very complex probabilities for what comes next in a sequence based on what preceded that sequence. If we think about it in machine translation terms, there was the older generation of statistical MT, and you could think of that as being roughly equivalent to saying, you know, if you have this and this, then this. So if you see these two words in combination, then this word is likely to appear in the target language. When we move to large language models, you could think of it as now being probabilities based on 400 simultaneous inputs, which means there's much more sophisticated statistics involved. Patterns that are much more nuanced can be used. And then when we look at the chat interface on the large language models, that's basically, it's just adding a way to put a query in and then generate an output that seems like it's going to follow from that query. And actually putting the chat interface on was a pretty big step, because previously you had to give exemplars and it would make things like it. So it was a big improvement. And getting to this, the question you see there, can LLMs reason? Well, not really, because all they're looking at is sequences of zeros and ones and making predictions. That said, it can look like they're reasoning, because those patterns often encode reasoning that was done by humans in the past. So they're reiterating things that humans have done, and it can look convincingly like reasoning. But it's still drawing on, something that was done in the past by humans and encoded in text or images or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So I like your analogy, Arlie, and also the fact that you're referring to a big step, adding an agent, that is a chatbot interface, to what used to be the Da Vinci and the first, well, GPT-1, GPT-2, even GPT-3. The difference between GPT, I used GPT-1 and 2, and they were very cranky. You had to go in with code. People didn't like the replies. Okay, there was a lot less data. Therefore, there was no reasoning. There was no, how could we call it? There was no experience of reasoning, because there was no chatting. There was just code, or the person asking a lot of data about something and then retrieving that data. The big step, really, the big leap forward came when somebody had the brilliant idea of adding a chat interface, providing the fantasy of providing the user experience that I'm actually having a conversation with somebody who can lie to me and give me a lot of hallucinated feedback or wrong answers. Okay, but is extremely fluent.
No. Now, you mentioned GPT-2, and I'd use that. And for anybody who's used Chat GPT, it's almost an unrecognizably different experience. GPT-2, the prompting procedure, everything was very different, and I like the way you described it as cranky. You could do things, but it was not a user-friendly experience at that point.
True. So I think having the chat and having the chat feature, or adding the chatbot feature, and I can tell you how that happened. I mean, the chatbot feature happens by teaching, by gathering a lot of questions and answers, so that the model can learn how people ask questions and reply to questions. And by generalizing over massive amounts of data, you can infer a lot more questions and answers. But that chat interface was the breakaway point for ChatGPT or for LLMs. And by the way, an LLM is not ChatGPT. LLM by definition does not need to have a chat interface. LLMs previously were much smaller and didn't have chatbot interfaces. So to go back to the reasoning point, and I had this discussion with many people, even university professors. They're very good at predicting the next token. Okay, they're training with unbelievable large amounts of data. So yes, you can compare the works of Karl Marx with the works of Adolf Hitler and then provide a summary of them. But it's only the data you have provided. And remember that expression, I can only offer information up to October 2021, something like that. So that is a very bad. Reasoning doesn't work that way. I may not have read Kant or Schopenhauer, okay, but maybe I've heard of them, and I have a very badly informed opinion about some philosophers, okay, and not because I've read them, but I have opinion, my second or even third hand opinion. Now, LLM has seen or has not seen the data. It will not say, it will not have an opinion about something that has not seen. Uh, okay, so are we reaching a plateau in 2024? I keep hearing things about the technology not moving forward um, much. That the new models are not spectacularly better than previous versions, and all they're doing is basically scaling up and providing cheaper or faster services. Claude, Cohere, and the rest.
Well, I think this is an interesting question because, if we're just looking at model performance versus size, I think it's pretty clear we are plateauing. What we're seeing is a situation now where it takes exponential increases in training data to eke out linear increases in performance. And basically now when you look at OpenAI or these others, they've ingested pretty much everything they can. So short of embarking in massive synthetic data um, creation projects or finding some way to plumb the depths of the dark web for all the stuff that's not surfaced, normally there's just not data to increase this performance thing. But at the same time, there's other areas that are improving. We're seeing more efficiency in the models, which does mean at some level the performance is increasing per energy input, and that's hugely important. We're seeing greater understanding of how to control inputs and outputs to make this more useful. So I think we're going to see continual improvements in the usability, even if the power of the systems directly is, I think, plateauing. And I'm also writing about this right now that we look at S curves. I think everybody's familiar with the concept of an S. When you're in that center of the S curve, you don't have a really good way to see how high the S curve's going because it's looking like a linear trend line that just heads off to infinity. But at some point, it tapers off and becomes asymptotic. And I think there's good evidence that, at least as far as the fundamental technology goes, we're already at that point where it's tapering off and becoming asymptotic, which is the plateau phase.
Okay, so this is, but on the other hand, this is now the, let's call it the age of agents, which are not massive improvements, but there are AI features, programs, software, agents that do one or two things, or three, a couple of things, but they do them really, really, really well. One of them can be, for example, quality estimation in the world of translation. Another one can be discerning what is relevant or not relevant in
Yeah.
organization. Okay, these emails are not relevant. I'm not saying spam, but they're more prone to be read by the mortgage assessment department rather than a credit card department. Those smaller applications of AI are called agents. And I do see a very good future for them because they can be very, very good. Even working together, you can combine several agents to perform a task at resolving a particular problem.
Yeah. I absolutely agreed. I think this is where we're going to see a lot of improvement because it's a manageable task, whereas trying to elevate to a GPT-5, that's a huge task. And
Hmm.
it's elevating what's useful and what isn't useful. It's trying to improve the ability to write I don't know, an ode to metal music in the style of a Shakespearean sonnet that you don't need, along with let's improve quality estimation. But if you say, hey, let's focus on something,
Mhm.
then it becomes much more useful and tractable to make significant improvements on a definable task. And I think we'll see in addition to large language models, we're going to see focused language models that can use 1/100th of the input to still achieve 99% of the output at a much more energy efficient and time efficient level. And so I'm really excited to see where work into smaller agents goes because I think that's the next frontier.
Good point. And you're saying language models, not large, could be small language models.
Yeah, could be very small by comparison,
Yeah,
but focused.
but focused. Exactly, exactly. Okay. Um, I think we covered pretty well what an agent is doing. And also agents here, just to go back to our opening remarks, then agents become measurable. You have
Yes.
agents that perform a task, and this task is measurable. And then you have your KPIs, and you know how good your solution is. Okay, can be compared to others, but definitely compared to what you are doing. You're improving, in your path, and you're achieving perfection, or you're very close to perfection. So yeah, I'm very excited as well about what agents can do for us in. I'm not going to say the near future, over the next. They're already here.
Yeah.
They're already here. Okay, let's move on to one particular area, which is deeply adapted machine translation. We moved in from rule-based. I'm not going to explain the whole thing, but we moved from rule-based to statistical to neural. Every step has been a wow in the industry. Every time there's been a new breakthrough, when new technology coming in the language industry, in machine translation, everybody has had this feeling: tears for fears, something happening. This is the end of machines are translating like humans. We will not need translators because machines will translate everything. Do you remember that one? We will translate everything that the Russians are saying in 5 years.
Yeah. It's the old joke that when will we have perfect MT? It's 5 years away, and it has been for the last 50 years.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah.
So, big fears, small fears, or absolute panic? Are we going to be, translation companies, LSPs, translators are going to be substituted by fluent machines?
I think one of the challenges is that it's well, I like to compare what's going on right now to talking about global warming. That people say, well, it isn't just warming; it's everything happening simultaneously, all at once, in every direction. And
Mhm.
what we're seeing with AI and translation is, yeah, there are some things where I think humans are going to be replaced.
Mhm.
There are things that humans won't be replaced. There are going to be new opportunities that open up because of AI. And so if you're looking at the micro level, at, if you're a translator, what you've been doing day to day, this can look like an extinction level event depending on what it is you've been doing. Whereas somebody, in the next cubicle over or wherever might be looking at it and saying, hey, this is great. I can do so much more. So all of these experiences at once, I think, are valid. And the real challenge we're facing with all this now is saying, well, okay, what is the role of humans as you have here? Is it, are they just empty janitors at the end of the loop? Or are they at the core? Are they controlling it, or are they controlled by it? All these are huge existential questions that we're in the midst of solving right now.
Yeah, I think for me, a couple of years ago, human in the loop was a pret-a-porter, was a high fashion.
Yeah.
That's what the future was holding for translators. But it is bleak. You are a translator, you spend so many years studying at university, you've done your localization courses, blah, 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 paid so much money. And then what you're doing is correcting machine errors. Well, yeah, it's not very creative. Would you pay university education for that? So I think we were mistreating translators by, um, but then again, this is a mature thought. And after, I mean, post event, we have been mistreating translators by saying that they are humans in the loop. I know it's that sold very well for crowdsourcing platforms and new wave LSPs, etc. Um, but humans are much better than simple operators that correct errors, and then somebody in the background checking how many errors they corrected. Is soul breaking. really. It's not what humans do. Humans are creative. And now we have a technology that, if used properly, uh, translates, can translate us, at least in the big languages. Then we can have a conversation about lower resource languages, okay, not being as good. That's true. But then it's a matter of data. So if machines can uh, produce translations that are as fluent as humans, uh, what is the role for the translator? It's not in the loop. It's not correcting mistakes anymore. Is it at the end verifying that everything is okay? Is it above controlling prompting, pre-prompting the machine to ensure that the process, applying glossaries, and ensuring that everything is going to go and has gone okay? What is the role of humans? What is the role of humans going to be?
I think that's really the challenge we're facing right now is we're defining this now, and we're seeing a lot of different attempts to do this. Some of them are all about commoditizing the human and um, really, turning humans into uh, servants of the machine. And
Mhm,
I worry about that as one option. Now that's the janitorial model I mentioned, where you're just sweeping up
mhm,
after it and fixing things. Now, in some cases, really what you do need for some things is really just a human to who can evaluate and say, this is good to go or not. But there are other things where, anything where there's high risk, and I think one of the big shifts I've seen industry-wide in about the last 18 months is this dramatic shift from thinking about translation quality as meaning I've got to get this perfect to meaning I
mhm,
need to address risk in an appropriate fashion. And
mhm,
for some things, the risk is low. Just let the machine do it. If it makes a mistake, what's the worst thing that's going to happen?
mhm.
Maybe somebody um, doesn't buy something today. But for other things, we really need humans with oversight, and that's where the human at the core model comes in. And I think of it as being a bit like all the automation and things that help airline pilots get you safely from point A to B. The airline pilot's absolutely in charge, can go in and control things if they need to. But at the end of the day, you don't really care if the pilot shouldn't have to care about what's the level of fluids in the aft lavatory or what is the AC unit 6 working in the back of the plane. So they have this automation that takes care of that, and then they focus on what's really the value added is I get my passengers safely from, Denver to Rome or whatever it may be. And I avoid turbulence and I avoid, dangerous situations. And there you definitely want the human in charge. So because it's a high risk situation, we pay them well, and the automation helps them without replacing them.
Without replacing them, is that the impact in our industry? Do you think that no people are going to be replaced?
I think that's the worry. And I think for the risk of replacement really is for generalists who don't have a specialization. They just translate whatever comes their way.
Mhm,
So they aren't necessarily contributing some degree of expertise. And this comes to the question, can LLMs translate as well as humans? I can't go into the source for this because it has yet to be published, but there's a fairly large scale study of new professional translators, and it finds that, hey, the LLMs actually translate as well as some of the new professionals. They
mhm,
do not translate as well as the seasoned professionals who are experts. But this creates a problem because if we think, oh, we're going to replace all these people who aren't, top-notch translators. Now, where are the next generation of top-notch translators going to come from?
mhm.
And this decimation of the pipeline into becoming highly skilled professionals is something I think we haven't considered as an industry as much as we need to. So to answer the questions, can LLMs translate as well as humans? Well, they can translate as well as some humans. but
Hmm.
not as the best humans. But how do we get the best humans? And where's the training ground for the next generation if, we've automated all the easy stuff and that's left is the hard stuff that really needs an expert?
Yeah, I think scaling is one um, is one thing to consider here. But this is not LLM. I mean, ever since neural networks and even
Yeah.
uh, statistical machine translation and even rule-based, anytime you had a machine, you could use the machine to scale and translate overnight, far, far, far more than any human could possibly. We need to sleep. We are physical. We need to have a coffee. We need to wake up in the morning. We can't work 24. We're not connected to electricity.
Yeah.
Um, and okay, if you run a translation company, is great. You have a machine that is plugged, as long as the machine is plugged into electricity, you're pumping words 24/7. Uh, good. That's good news. But this reminds me of an anecdote with FEFE. It's one of our clients in Spain. It's very large. It's the fourth largest news agency in the world. And we provide machine translation for them. Over 1,000 journalists use it every day. Never had any problem over the years, except 2023, when a typo in Spanish produced a swearing word in Brazilian Portuguese. And this caused an uproar by the Brazilians because nobody had read the machine translated output, and that word had been published on a web.
Yeah.
And we got a complaint. We got a complaint. But that was one word in 145 million words.
Yeah.
So we put things in perspective. We never had any complaints in 2 years. We had one. Um, can we rely on this LLM translation? Can we rely on it? You've been relying on it, and our conversation with the agency was, well, you've relied on it. We rely on it. It's good enough. You think it's good enough. You publish it because it's so fluent. These things can happen. It's 0.00001, but it does happen.
And to be fair, the same thing could have happened with a human translator.
Far more,
Uh,
far more, a lot more, many times. I'm
yeah.
sure. In 145 million, you would have had a lot more mistakes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, your discussion of the scale there, I think, is really important too, because if we look, we at CSA Research every year we do this thought experiment where we say, okay, what percentage of all content generated every day is translated by humans? And
Mhm.
I just recently did a slide where I show that as a block of squares, and you can't even see the tiny portion
Oh
of all
yeah,
that content that's translated by humans. And you zoom in,
absolutely.
and I want to say I got zoomed into that image like 1,000 times before you see the amount translated by humans as a tiny, tiny square. So
Yeah.
having machines translate more and more and lower the unit cost actually, I think, is going to benefit humans by increasing demand for their services. They'll be doing different things, but it's going to be an increase in demand because it'll make translation more accessible.
Well, going back to your analogy about the airline pilot, uh, I'm not sure whether this is real or not, but um, somebody told me that there was an Air France flight that ran into trouble, and the pilots had been relying on autopiloting airplanes. Just all they cared about was taking off and landing, and the rest of the flight, Denver to Rome or Washington to Beijing, was done automatically. That they had lost the skills to pilot the airplane through a big storm, and had a big storm ahead of them, and had to bring out the manual and read exactly what to do, because for them flying was just operating a machine that cruises through the skies.
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting point because if we look at what airline pilots do, ideally and by law, they're having to go in and use the simulator and hand fly
Mm.
difficult situations on a regular basis because if they don't, they lose that muscle memory and that
Mm-hmm.
knowledge of how to do it. And so when I talk to translators, I tell them if you want to, the best thing you can do to improve as a translator that will help set you up for anything is translate poetry. That
Yeah,
stretches your mind
yeah,
and it builds your skill probably faster than anything else you can do.
yeah, yeah. Songs, anything with cultural references, idiomatic expressions. Yeah.
And for those of you who haven't ever translated poetry, if you get into it, it is, I think, the funnest thing
Mm.
to translate. And I'm not convinced we're ever going to see a chat GPT uh, translate poetry well.
Uh, because of cultural reference,
Um,
because of cultural references. Yeah, yeah. So, well, I'm showing here a little diagram of on how agent-based translation happens nowadays. It's not as simple as asking LLM, look, translate it into Danish or Swedish. And, whoa, wow, it's perfect Danish or perfect Swedish. Um, Typically, systems have several ways of doing it, but we use a RAG database
mhm.
that creates embeddings on words. And this helps us then to have agentic evaluation because we have the TMXs and the terminology to compare. Um, and the results are uh, very fluent because of the control we had on the LLM output. Okay, the LLM is very good at very general. You're right. So the competition here is the generalist translator that can translate anything that comes my way because I need to make $20, $30 $20 or $30 an hour. My value, however, is being specialized. Okay,
Uh,
so let's move on.
Maybe I'll just add one thing to your diagram there. I think that the RAG approach, for those who don't know about it, this is finding relevant data and putting it into the prompt as a way to fine tune it. And one
Mm.
of the great things about that too is that if you find you don't have relevant data, then you can have special cases say, okay, I know I need to get a human in here because I'm not finding what would improve this. So once you start doing this, you can gain a lot of intelligence into this and you can figure out where do I need human involvement that's going to add value, that's going to be interesting. Because, to ask a translator, we talk about cleaning up after machines, but really to ask a translator to translate, the 500th variant of click next to continue, that's kind of degrading as well. So this sort of approach opens up all sorts of ways to figure out where can we really elevate the human to where they're needed.
Yeah, through a rack system, a rack system is a way of creating embeddings.
Mhm.
It's very easy to create specific translation engines the way in the past, well, until a couple of years ago, we needed a lot of data, and this data had to be parallel data, and we would train a neural engine. And then sometimes hope for the best because you needed a lot of examples in order to influence the final translation. Now, however, with a RAG system with a vector database, you only need a couple of examples to tell the system, look, I want this to be translated
Yeah.
this way. In this example, here is actually a real case of a local supermarket that used Google Translate to ask a Chinese supplier about a credit note. Now, the credit note in Spanish means is the word abono. Abono means okay, you owe me money. Let's reconciliate our accounts. But just happens to be the same word abono as manure or fertilizer. So by using Google Translate, I don't know what the Chinese supplier got, but the answer in English from China was, "I am very sorry, but we are not a fertilizer company." So that we went to the supermarket and said, look, you only need a couple of examples to say abono is great note because you don't sell fertilizer, you sell food, all the things that you can find in a supermarket, but you don't. maybe if you do one day, okay, you'll have another rack system for you. But typically, you're gonna ask for crate notes, not for manual.
Yeah.
Okay, and this took, it just takes literally minutes, whereas before we would need hours or days to
Yeah,
train.
and for the human again, this is great because it means you're not being to use your analogy of manure, you're not being handed a bunch of manure from the system.
Yeah, and the beauty is that you can create as many engines slash index, well, let's call them models engines, as you want. I mean, if you, okay, poetry, if you want to be very creative for this particular client, all you need is a couple of examples. And
Yeah.
the RAG system will find the embeddings, the relationships between these words and the patterns and say, look, I know that Arlie likes, roses are red and carnations are purple, and today I'm happy. Um, is a nice way to maximize LLM fluency and human creativity, and control.
Okay.
Okay, I want to give some time to the audience. So let's move into, but it ties up very very nicely with agents and control and KPIs. So let's move on to the next point, which is knowledge retrieval. And here's when people might think, well, we're in the language industry, translations, TMX files, glossaries, give me all that. But what are we even talking about knowledge retrieval? Um, well, knowledge retrieval should be part of the language industry. At the end of the day, we produce content. We are given content in a language, and we translate it into another language. And that content has to be made available. This is all NLP, it's natural language processing, where you are, whether you are translating or locating content. And the issue that we have, the problem, the challenge that we have nowadays is that there is so much content we can't even find exactly what we are looking for. And search engines can only be relied upon so much because they can be tricked. That's why there are so many SEO agencies in the world. So it is perhaps one of the areas where people with language skills, translators, can move into, because they are used to deal with, let's say, not, yeah, let's call it knowledge retrieval, if translation is knowledge retrieval at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept of translation as knowledge retrieval. And I like it because often people have the idea that translation is an encoding decoding problem, that you have
Oh,
something
no.
in one language and you just have to transcode it into another language. But if we think about it as knowledge retrieval, that it refers to some knowledge and someone's job is to find equivalent knowledge and represent it, that's a very different task than transcoding. And it's one where, again, going back to the idea of human expertise, why you can't, it really gets at why you can't hand, say your instructions for your nuclear power operating plant to, the guy who's been translating for a year and who's been working on tech manuals for computers. Because it's not just about the words, it's about that real understanding. And here you put up something about knowledge graphs. I think that's really important when we talk about knowledge retrieval is knowledge graphs, because that starts encoding semantics.
Yeah,
And
we'll see a slide in a minute.
yeah,
No, for the benefit of those that don't know knowledge graphs. But yeah, I like to think about translation. Otherwise, we would be machines. Okay, give me the word in French for table. That. Give me the word in French for bottle. Okay, that you don't need a lot of skills. Now, give me the equivalent in French or English of this line, which is poetry, which is highly referential to Anglo-Saxon or French or Polish or Spanish culture. Well, you need a very different set of skills here. You need a lot of knowledge of the world, both cultures, and then the exact choice of words which may not be the direct translation, but conceptually you get the idea that
Yeah.
which is what counts. This is a challenge that subtitlers often face uh, because there is a lot of dialogue in films. So
Yeah.
I'll move on for the benefits of those that don't know what a knowledge graph. I'm sure that you can. Do you want to talk about this, Arlie, a little bit?
Yeah. So knowledge graphs are they're not really new, but they are new to most people, a type of database of relationships between things. And this is a great example here. So the knowledge that Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa, or that Da Vinci is a person. And once you have this, you can understand the relationships between entities and use that to inform RAG or other things. Whereas without that, and this comes to the knowledge retrieval part of it, without that, you're just, you're putting in strings and you're trying to find something based on the words.
Mhm,
I think all of us have had the experience of we've created a document, we don't know where we stored it, and we spend an hour trying to find it, only to find out we couldn't find it because we were looking for the wrong word. Whereas if it was about the knowledge and we're linked to concepts, it would be instantly discoverable.
mhm,
Um, and so once we moved to knowledge graphs, one of my friends, Mike Dillinger, described it as there's quick and easy applications for LLMs. There's the slow and steady work needed for knowledge graphs, but when you combine them, you get the advantages of that slow and steady work at the speed of an LLM.
mhm.
And it can really make those things avoid stupid errors that we call hallucination that often are going off of an ambiguous word or lack of some context. This can start injecting that knowledge, and it's
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah. Somebody emailed me a couple of weeks ago on a report that he was drafting, and he had asked one of the LLMs. I'm not going to mention which one. Um, and it was something about Pangeanic, and it named Kurti Vashi as the CEO of Pangeanic, living in Barcelona. So I don't know whether that, how it got that information wrong, but obviously that would not happen if the information was based on knowledge graph retrieval,
Yeah.
because you would know exactly who's the CEO. That Kirti Vashi is a works for Translated, but he lives in California, and who he is, and he's not. There is no relation with Pangeanic. But if you just well, if you're just finding patterns and you're only predicting the next one, well, could happen that I've been on the same roundtables as Kirti. So the word CEO, the word Pangeanic, and the word Kirti have happened, and probably you Arle might be part of the results in one LLM in a couple of weeks when they do a retrain, because you've been in a webinar with Manuel.
I'm ready to move into your office now, Manuel.
You're welcome. You will be welcome. Even though Valencia is not in the best shape right now, but because of the floods that we had, the city is intact, but the southern part is really bad. But you will be very welcome here. Um, okay, just to clarify as we move closer to question and answers, what is a RAG system? Again, you want to introduce the concept of RAG, shall I?
Well, I've not worked with this diagram, but I think I can sum it up as a system that uses an approach that finds relevant data from
Mm,
some third-party source and injects it into the prompt to an LLM in a way that it provides context and can constrain the output. So, a good example would be if you've got an LLM and it's composing, responses to support queries. you could say, okay, this customer has the premium platinum tier support and it includes these things, and you inject that in the prompt, and then it's answering based on knowledge about that individual rather than just spinning up whatever happens to come up to the top.
Yeah, it's a way using RAGs and RAG systems is a way to narrow down the search and keeping the LLM informed all the time with new information. So you can spend $100 million training the next ChatGPT, or you can have a RAG system that basically contains your data.
Yeah.
Your data can be anything, can be documents, can be reports, can be other URLs, can be a website, could be anything. All this data is then embedded. I'm looking at the left part here with a technique called chunking, which obviously you don't understand is splitting the information in little chunks. And these chunks are embedded so that they become a little piece of information. So when you prompt the system with the word, who is Arle Lommel, who is Manuel, they find the word Manuel and they find Manuel in a document that says Manuel is linked to Pangeanic. It's not a knowledge graph. Knowledge graph augments RAG capabilities a lot more, but it's a way to go to specialize an LLM, to specialize an LLM with my data, with my documents, or with the type of data that I want to create an experience with. So I want to create a chat that knows very well about building laws and permits in Colorado. Okay, so I will need Colorado state laws on building permits. How high can I build? Downtown I can build skyscrapers, but if I'm in Boulder, I'm only allowed 2 stories, etc. Can I build close to historic buildings next to an old church? Yes or no? So I can combine state law, national law, and then local law. Local law permits in Boulder, Colorado. And this system that I just created with all that data will answer quite specifically and quite well with the fluency of an LLM. It will give you the LLM fluency, but specifically very well with the data on building rights that I have given it. In our case, for example, we use a very similar system, but rather than building, we use TMX files and reference files for translation. So the LLM is geared to produce translation, but we also have a product for the knowledge retrieval and document retrieval. So in summary, this is what would happen. You would have your vectors in a vector database, all your embeddings, a knowledge graph if you want to sophisticate the system very much, and then all the prompts will gear the system into answering the questions with the data that I have provided. And if the answer is not on the set of data that I've provided, I have 2 options. One, I go back to the LLM and I say, well, I answer the same as Claude or ChatGPT, or I give you no answer. So I don't know about if you can build a skyscraper in this town. Oh, yes, you can. You should have permits because there's a lot of available land in this town.
When you first said that, I misheard it and thought you were talking about building pyramids, and I thought, wow, that's a very specialized topic.
that could be that could be very well a question. Can I build a pyramid in Boulder, Colorado? And then you would retrieve data and say, well, I have no information about building pyramids, but you can build Walmart, you can build McDonald's, you can build 3-story or some bungalows, etc. And then and this is exactly what would happen when you have a prompt such as the first one. If we were to query CSAs, reports, the system would understand what part is knowledge, has to go to a knowledge graph for analysis, and what part has to go to a vector database, because half these little chunks from CSA reports, or the second, in the second example, I want something that is similar to article XYZ, then I would understand that that is part of the chunks that I've previously prepared, and I should have something about article XYZ.
Yeah. I want to point out here for anybody who's looking at this from a business perspective, how really the business value of this is just absolutely huge. For years, organizations have talked about they want to enter into dialogue with their audience. And yet that usually means we push something out and, if you complain on Twitter, maybe we hear about it. There's no real dialogue. Whereas this, allows them to enter into something that to them at least feels like, hey, I'm getting something that's relevant to me. And if you're monitoring this, which you need to do this, then you can start saying, well, these are the things people are asking about, or I need to step in because somebody was really angry with this. And it provides a way that you actually, as an organization, can really personalize what you're doing for your audience in ways that were not practical a few years ago. It's really amazing. And part of that personalization could include, I need to answer this person in Catalan
Mm-hmm.
or German or whatever it may be. That again, previously you would have needed to have multiple systems do that. Now it can be done in one system often.
Yeah, well, this allows you to have people talk to your data rather than having Arle answer 55 emails per hour, or Manuel having to answer 55 emails an hour because everybody. No, if you have so much data, or even employees, you have employees whose job is to tell people within an organization that you're breaking such a day because it's Thanksgiving or Christmas, or you are 2 days short under or over your annual holiday vacation period,
Yeah.
or what did the company do, etc. last year on whatever subject. So it's good for internal staff because it does provide these efficiencies. It's very good for clients outside because, well, this could be a way of killing off translation. If you have people speaking in Catalan or Chinese or Japanese, and you only have one original source, it's not that we want to do that, but some of our clients have said, look, if I do that, maybe I don't need to spend so much money on translation. I'm going to let people talk to my documents, and then I will translate the pages that I see that really have ROI in that country, because people are very eager about my products or these 3 products, but not the rest.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say kill off translation. I think it's kill off very low, some of it, but it actually then frees up resources to really do a proper job for what matters. So it's not just decimating it; it's changing the focus. So we'll see how this goes, but we're in the midst of all these, going back to industry changes. What's going to be done with humans? What's going to be generated? What will be translated? All that is, up in the air right now.
It's up in the air. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So just to conclude our session here, and then we'll open the floor to anybody that has any questions. There is a little guide on our website if you want to visit it. It looks like this, and it summarizes everything that Pangeanic does. It doesn't give you any information if you try to extract from it how to make a pizza or double cheeseburger. Some days we tweak and we open it just for fun, and we let people know, yeah, to make a double cheeseburger, you need so much meat and so much cheddar cheese. But the answers only about facts and things that are that come from Pangeanic, and it's updated every week, every 2 weeks with new content, fresh content, only the web. And so go visit our website, have fun with it. It's called Echo Chat. And now I'll stop here and we'll open the floor to any questions.
If you haven't created any questions, I think you can put them in the Q&A pane. Maybe we're waiting to see if there's any, Manuel. Maybe I'll ask you one is, what is your vision for the future of humans in this world?
In this world, world meaning
as we're developing, yeah. Are we going to be? Do you think there's a future for linguistic professionals, translators, interpreters, and so forth?
Chris Wendt, the creator of Bing Translator, I met him a few years ago in Japan, and he said, "I'm telling my children not to become translators because there's no future." But obviously, you would say that. You wouldn't spend your life and your research creating something that you'd say, well, it has no value because even my children could beat it. So the change is fundamental. What is happening is fundamental, is much, much bigger than the advent of statistical machine translation, the move from rule-based to statistical, and the neural, much, much bigger. With statistical, there were some languages which we knew immediately were not working well. It was not that fluent. But now the key word, the key point for me is fluency. On the surface of it is so fluent that people who had no interest in machine translation or the technology 4 years ago are saying, well, give it to ChatGPT, translate it. Yeah, the French will read it. I can read it in English. So why can't the French or the Germans read it with the same amount of fluency that I'm reading it in English? So as it happens with any industrial revolution, is the people at the bottom, the people that are not specialized, as you said, the people that take anything in, that will be most affected. People that have skills or knowledge are already creating areas of expertise, new areas of expertise, even new job titles at organizations. Because it's not just the people, but it's the whole workflow that is changing. The segment, we've been dominated by the segment mentality over the last, how many, 30, since the 90s.
Since October 1998 with TMX.
And my KPI was how many sentences, and a sentence is something that begins with a capital letter and ends with a, well, sometimes doesn't. Well, we know what a segment is. What Trados says a segment is a segment, okay? And how many errors are per segment? Those are my KPIs. Now that is exactly what is. That is a dinosaur that is disappearing.
Yeah.
That way of delivering translation is disappearing. The cat tool mentality. Then we can open here. This could call for another webinar. Is that a future for TMSs? What are TMSs going to do? Are they going to become experiences, and are they going to compete with the LSPs because they have the clients at the end of the day, so they provide solutions and they integrate? That would be another huge, another full webinar. So the transformation really is happens at the bottom, also happens at the top. Large LSPs, large language providers, are being asked to provide novel ways to deliver translations, and then we can discuss pricing. There'll be new prices, new pricing models, etc. But we want to do without the segment. We want the full document. infecting.
Yeah, and that requires major re-engineering on the translation technology front. It's not just a small tweak. This is
Oh yeah,
pulling the guts out and replacing them.
yeah, because then you have to retrain from the bottom, from the top to the bottom. You have to re-engineer everything. Your whole, but for many others, for many companies, all they do is choose one tool or another, and then translate at segment level and stand. Let's stand on the buyer side, on the client side. They don't care. They don't care how many segments we translate. We have a set of documents on a whole web page that needs to go into X number of languages. So it's the document, the web page, what matters, the experience that people get out of it. And the experience can be very good or very bad on one single sentence if it's improperly localized.
Um, Maybe one last thought I would have for those who've heard this. I mean, I could see some people walking away saying, "Hey, this sounds really interesting." Others might say, "This sounds frightening." Um, you know, I think about when I first was involved with this sector in the late 1990s, and the horizon was wide open, and nobody knew where it was going to go. I think we're really in that same situation now, where those who are willing to take risks and try new things are going to find that the horizon is wide open because we don't yet know what's going to emerge. And
Mm-hmm.
I am sorry for, a translator who says, "Hey, I just like translating. I, what am I going to do?" But for the ones who are saying, "Hey, I'm going to experiment with this," they're going to find things they can do. I think that the human will be relevant. It's going to change dramatically, but I'm optimistic for the people involved if they're willing to accept a certain amount of risk and try new things.
Yeah, there is an anonymous attendee here that has a question
Mhm.
for us, and is quite related to what we are saying. If you're familiar with setting up agent communities to evaluate and criticize the output, can you mention this? Can you mention this as well? Yeah, okay, that is exactly one of the specializations of agents. To be critics, so they verify how close the output is given a reference material. But
I think that is so critical right now because there's this long-running debate, which you know well in AI circles, saying, "Well, if you can detect problems, why don't you just fix the model so they don't occur?" And to some extent, I agree with that, but you always need that antagonistic system that's not subject to the same biases.
mm,
And I think that's a hugely important point.
yeah, yeah, and it is a system that takes into account the well always all, all agentic references, and then I could go on and mention the work that Unbabel, for example, has done. Is quite good as well. There's always a reference material that you take into account to say how close you are to my gold standard.
Right.
Um, but the game here is very open because your reference, your gold standard, can be anything, and you can set it in not on the fly, but in minutes.
Mhm.
You need a model to be created, and then again we're going back to rack systems, etc.
Yeah.
There's a second question on here. Also, are we getting away from words and moving towards generative platforms?
Well, that gets into a bunch of issues. I think, we've been stuck in the per word model for this industry for so long because of its predictability. But if we're moving into these agentic workflows, words are no longer predictive of effort. And so we're going to have to see a shift away from words to effort-based measures. And that's a huge challenge as well. Because, once you do that, you can't say, "I've got a million words to translate, and I know I'm going to get, 63% TM leverage. So I know exactly what my costs are going to be, and I can put that in a budget item, and, I will not go over that."
Mm,
But it just actually, it forces professionalization of the sector to the way other creatives, legal, other things, they're billing by effort, not on the number of words they write. So it's
Yeah, yeah. Remember when Google Translate came along, they were charging per character, and people went, "Whoa, what is a character? How do you count characters? We count words. We don't count characters in this." Well,
And the Chinese said, "We love this. We're
yeah,
charging everybody now."
yeah, the Asian people, Japanese, Chinese said, "Well, we love characters. We only writing characters." Okay, there's another question from Dominique saying, which areas of translation would you suggest next generation linguists need to specialize in?
Well, there's a couple ways to answer that. And on the technology front, they really need to learn how can I use LLMs to assist me in translation. And often that's actually using it for what I call translation adjacent tasks. Like, okay, I need to fix the formality of this text, which is something you're not going to get paid much for, and it's a horrible pain to do.
Mm-hmm.
Throw it to the LM. So learn where you can use this to augment what you're doing. But then if you're a translator and you're looking for the future, I'd say find a specialty, ideally in something where there's regulatory or risk-based reasons that humans need to be involved. That's going to ensure your relevance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. More question. Oh, we have a bunch of questions here, Arne. So we probably said something right. There's two questions from Ronald Hewitt. Hello, Ronald. What format does the reference material need to be? Dark Excel websites? I guess this has more to do with um, the rack system
I would think so.
or the chatbot system. If it's the rack system, well, I can answer for us in our case. I can't talk about other people's systems, but in our case, it's just bilingual material. The rack system works with TMXs and CSV files. So it finds a pattern, a matching pattern. If it's for a chatbot, it's anything. It's a document. It could be even a PDF, just to find information. But the concept is basically the same. Yeah, there's a piece of information, I chunk it, and then I need to retrieve it. This information can be how many bottles of wine are produced in California every year. Boom, and there's the answer, and then I will retrieve it when I need. Or this bunch of information is English, French, or German, Spanish, whatever. And second question from Ronald, can sites be configured to refuse searches by LLMs for referencing?
Oh, that's a huge issue.
um, we have one stop bot so that OpenAI does not crawl our site anymore. And we don't produce content that helps OpenAI improve the systems. So that's why probably it's getting details wrong about Pangeanic because it's not being refreshed. And it's very simple to do. Is you can search for it on the internet. It's a line of code that you can add to your robots txt file and say stop. OpenAI crawling my website. We don't crawl websites when that's not our business. We do use websites as training material, but only for the client that has bought our chat bot system. So obviously the client wants to add that website content. But we're not in the crawling business. It's not what we do.
Yeah. I said that's a huge issue because if your website's already been crawled and it's in something like Common Crawl, the cat's out of the bag, and
Yeah,
it will be almost impossible to stop it from being used.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, you can stop it from now on by adding this, by blocking this. But yes, it's 2024, you know. And you've probably had 20 websites and a lot of information prior to that. And that's going because we had no consciousness. We had no way of figuring, even imagining that somebody was going to use that content.
Yeah.
Okay, question from Jeffrey. How do you see content reauthoring initiatives, plain language, people-centered approach, etc., implemented by companies and governments in being so different from all previously translated content as adverse this is a long question. How do you see content reauthoring initiatives implemented by companies and governments in being so different from all previously translated content as adversely affecting the translation strategy and costs of the organization implementing it? How can the Gen AI approach success in such scenarios?
No, I think that to really answer that, we'd have to sit down and get a lot of details. That's an interesting question, and it would affect more the traditional TM based approaches, I think, where you just, no longer matches your legacy materials. But in general, the plain language stuff should actually really help because it's going to eliminate ambiguities and other things that cause problems for translation. So there's a lot of potential there to make things easier to parse, easier to understand, easier to translate.
True, yeah. Let's remember that SEO has done a lot of damage as well in article writing, because for years people have been writing articles that could be easily understood by Google and would rank. And they were not very good articles, but they were articles that Google would understand very well. And they were stuffed with keywords. As we move on to a more understanding web, a more semantic web, that doesn't really matter. And keywords don't really matter. Okay. More questions. We will have time for other questions. Ahmed, not long ago, machine translation quality for Arabic was quite poor and almost unusable. Is there still a gap between Arabic and other languages like English or Spanish in terms of AI agents?
Yes, and this comes from what they're trained on. So I don't have the data at hand, but when we look at sources like Common Crawl, basically half of the data in them is in English. And if we look at European languages, it takes it to just shy of 90%, which means, Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, and all that is fighting for something like 13%. I can't remember the number. And this just means there's less data available for Arabic. And, if you looked at something like Farsi, there's going to be even less. And so there is this problem of what we call lower resource languages. And Arabic is relatively well resourced compared to many, but the performance is still going to fall far short of what you'd see in English or French or German.
Yeah, somebody mentioned to me that our experiences with LLMs in both translation and fluency are very biased because we prompt and use them in English, Spanish a lot, and the quality is quite good. It's very good. So then we immediately jump on the bandwagon and assume that the quality is going to be the same in Chinese, which has to be as good as it is in English or Spanish as it is in Arabic, and it's not. It has improved, I have to say, with music. Claude is particularly good with Arabic. I'm told. I don't speak Arabic, so it's second-hand knowledge. But they have done pretty good work on inputting a lot of cleaning data and adding quality data. And there are initiatives in Saudi Arabia, in the Gulf, and some LLMs have been created that respect and are very particular to Arabic culture, and they contain a lot of Arabic data that is relevant to the audience. But they're limited LLMs. They're limited. So I would say yes, the experience is different. Definitely. In fact, I do remember that for ChatGPT 3.5, one of the head of infrastructures at Pangeanic is from Kazakhstan, and he told us that Russian is horrible. You think it's great. You're going on about ChatGPT, but I read this in Russian. It's really broken. It's not really so good. That has improved.
Yeah.
Antonia Bini, who owns the RAG, customer or company? Will this be similar to TMS? Well, anybody can own a RAG. A RAG system is basically a vector database, as long as you have enough funds in your Azure or AWS account, you can host one. It's not very expensive, a couple of $100. and then usage. It's really the embeddings that cost money to create, but once they're created, there's not a lot more to pay for. Creating embeddings is computer intensive, but then the RAG works almost on decoding. Is question answering. So I can speak about Pangeanic experience. You know that from our side, the RAG can be hosted anywhere. Can be hosted by the customer, the company. It doesn't really matter.
Well, and the data still belongs to whoever is building it. So it's not like you're assigning the rights to the data to, you know, a provider that they can use for whatever. So you still retain the ownership.
That's right. That's right. Well, this links up very well with a comment by Dominique saying stop bots are the way forward. Common Crawl had all our data. There's nothing we could do about it. And our data has already been used to train these systems. So yeah, the cat is out of the bag. Yeah, but we cannot go back to Microsoft or OpenAI. Perhaps we could, but in practice, it's not possible. And say, look, don't train your systems with CSA research, website data, or Pangeanic data. That's already happened. But we can stop it in the future. And then at least this has elevated the conversation and has made people aware of how valuable their knowledge is and their content. I produce knowledge. It can be translations, whatever. I spend hours reading about it and then writing my reports. This is what I'm worth. If you come here and copy it, well, okay, you're infringing some copyrights. But then on the flip side, I can also monetize it. I can monetize my content. Substack is a good way of monetizing content and writing newsletters and keeping people informed.
It brings up an issue we've been discussing, Manuel and I both been talking about, is the need for legal clarity on some of this. And I think this is going to be a hot area for legislation and court decisions in the next few years. Hopefully we'll provide some clarity.
Yeah, it's well, how many court cases are there? There's the New York Times, that's the best well-known court case. But there's several others.
Yeah.
There's several others that I don't have the information with me right now, but there are several others, and they're not small use cases. They're not small small court cases.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 10:02 now. I don't think we have any more questions. If anybody has any more questions, Arle and me are here to help you solve them.
Yeah. And you can find us on LinkedIn if something occurs to you afterwards. It's a good way to reach out.
Yeah, we'll be posting, we'll edit the videos, the best moments, and we'll be posting it on LinkedIn and our YouTube channel so people can enjoy it as well.
Okay.
So if there are no more questions, I think that it was a good bunch and very interesting questions. Format, the sites. Don't forget, I'm sure that people, I think probably they will take one lesson, and it's at the OpenAI blog on a website. That's some of one of the things we teach people to, or we talk people to do more and more, like all over the world, because of how hard people feel about the website. At least it's something they have created and puts a lot of money creating content for it. No. Okay, so Diane is wishing us good luck. Well done, Manuel and Arle. Thank you. And if there are no more questions, I would leave it here, Arle. I would like to thank everyone for attending. It's been very interesting. It's always good talking to you, Arle.
Well, likewise, it's been a pleasure.
I know you always learn something new talking to you.
Well, and likewise.
Okay, thank you, audience. Thank you, Arle.
Okay.
Thanks for the
Bye,
time.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.